to talk about quality education, its transformative function, and of course, the varied thinking. Now, I start by defining education by saying that education in its general sense is a form of learning in which the knowledge, skills, and habits of a group of people are transferred from one generation to the next through teaching, training, or research, and such like things. Education frequently takes place under the guidance of others, but may also be autodidactic. Any experience that has a formative effect on the way one thinks, how one feels, or how one acts may be considered educational. It is currently fashionable to divide education into different learning modes. The learning modalities are probably the most common. You can see there on your screen, there's a visual, there's the auditory, there is also kinesthetic, and of course visual is learning based on observation and seeing what is being learned. Auditory is about learning based on listening to instructions and information. You can see where we are, whether we are hybrid. The last one is kinesthetic. That is learning based on hands-on work and engaging in activities. Of course, when people are taking term papers, people are making presentations, that is kinesthetical. Because we are having activities there. Now, what about quality education? It includes learners who are healthy, well-nourished, and ready to participate and learn and supported in learning by their families and communities. So learning is not just for individuals again. There's again collegiality. Collegiality means we are bringing more people on board to make it success. The stakeholders. The other item that demonstrates quality education is environments that are healthy, safe, protective, and gender sensitive, and provide adequate resources and facilities. Number 3 is content that is reflected in relevant curricula and materials for the acquisition of basic skills, especially in areas of literacy, numeracy, and skills for life and knowledge in such areas as gender, health, nutrition, HIV and AIDS, prevention, and peace. The other point is processes through which trained teachers use child-centered teaching approaches in well-managed classrooms and schools and skills assessment to facilitate learning and reduce disparities. The last point that demonstrates quality education is outcomes that encompasses knowledge, skills, and attitudes and are linked to national goals for education and positive participation in society. Now, this definition has allowed us to easily understand education as a complex system embedded in a political, cultural, and economic context. Now, the definition we have had also has taken us into account. The definition also takes into account the global and international influences that propel the discussion of educational quality, while ensuring that national and local educational context contribute to definitions of quality in varying countries. Now, when you look at the role of education, education is very important among all of us. It is education which transforms a person to live a better life, and more importantly, in a social well-being. It educates us with all needed attributes in leading our life in a proper lifestyle. Education does make a remarkable effect on one's personality. Getting educated and finally earning a professional degree prepares every one of us to be a major contributor in society. Hence, contributes in good organizations, companies, or institutions. Education is the one which provides us the thrust in getting ahead and doing something constructive in our near future. We will do something constructive when you are educated. If we have quality education, of course, it has to be critical, it has to be creative, it has to be innovative, it has to be problem solving. Education that does not meet the canons that we have made of, if it is the 21st century, it means the 21st century skills movement, including being technological driven, being uh, problem solving, geared towards problem solving, being technologically driven, I've said, being critical, being creative, being innovative, all those things. And of course, we talked about collegiality, being involving all the stakeholders. It's not a question of imposing a system of education and disappearing. Not at all. It has to bring on board the other stakeholders. So education involves gathering of knowledge in whatever aspects. It helps a person to draw the best out of their mind and spirit. Education plays a vital role in the personal growth and the social development among all of us. It imparts us with all the power and necessities in making a noticeable mark in any of the field. In all, it is one's education. It is one's education which decides what one can make out in their life. With the high urgency of education among all people, many of the nations have already come up with their ideas in maximizing the literacy among all. It becomes quite a challenging factor among many of the developing countries, especially Africa, in spreading the awareness of education. Even now, you find some people who are still taking education rightly, as if there are other things like wealth and money that have more power. The danger is educated people, they know Vision 2030 in reality. They draw it. They know Vision 2,000 years to come. They know Vision 1,000 years to come. But of course, pursuing other goals, that is now coming in Africa, where people are pursuing big business, they are entrepreneurs, all that has very negative effects, particularly when leadership is given to the least qualified. When even Plato was saying that only the philosopher kings should rule the country, should take over even the civic seats, should take over the legislative seats, should take over the very top cream of society, should take over the very educated. But we seem to be going down. Even when we put in Kenya, we keep putting the rule that every civic leader, every parliamentary legislator, to have a university degree from an institution that is competent and with competent teaching staff. They don't want to hear anything of the sort, because we have not spread the awareness of education, the awareness campaign, to show people even in the 21st century, we still have people, particularly in the third world, because of the survival, being called a survival continent. There are people who think, let us just struggle for now. We don't want to care. Let's grab anything and just leave our incoming generation with what we have grabbed. But that is not what will take us in the continent anywhere, because that will fail in the analysis. Only an educated person can even sustain even that which has been achieved. So coming now to who is an intellectual, which is a very critical, the climax of today's lesson. I can see we are there in time. An intellectual, what constitutes it? Now we have to be intellectual, because that is why we are here, to be intellectuals. Having said what education is all about, an intellectual is a person who primarily uses intelligence in either a professional or an individual capacity. Traditionally, the scholarly and the intellectual classes were closely identified. However, while intellectuals need not necessarily be actively involved in scholarship, they often have academic background and will typically have an association with a profession. The sociologist Frank Frendi said that intellectuals are not defined according to the jobs they do, but by the manner in which they act, the way they see themselves, and the values that they uphold. They usually arise from the educated elite, although the North American usage of intellectual, the vocabulary intellectual, includes them to the academics. Now, you see, generally, an intellectual is somebody, as Frank Fred says, a person who upholds the value he owns, she owns. Okay, it's a person who can die for something. And Martin Luther King used to say, a person who has not discovered what he can die for does not deserve to live. In other words, if we have not discovered a passion for which we can stand for as an ideal, as Nelson Mandela will say, freedom fighting, freedom struggle, is an ideal, is a passion, is something in my system, inculcated in my system of thought and mind, that I'm ready, if need be, to die for. That shows an intellectual, somebody who can uphold something out of intellectual. Well, before we reach there, we are not yet intellectuals. Now, let us now look briefly. Universal intellectual standards. What are they? These are universal. They are there, 5 of them. One is clarity. Clarity is be clear. In other words, could you elaborate further on that point? Could you express that point in another way? Could you give me an illustration? Could you give me an example? Yani, or in other words, clarity is a gateway standard in a statement. If a statement is unclear, we cannot determine whether it is accurate or relevant. In fact, we cannot tell anything about it because we don't yet know what it is saying. For example, the question, what can be done about the education system in Kenya, is unclear. In order to address the question adequately, we would need to have a clearer understanding of what the person asking the question is considering the problem to be. In other words, clarity is one of the universal intellectual standards. The second one is accuracy. An intellectual is accurate, okay? And accuracy leads you to ask philosophical questions like, is that really true? You go back to the Socratic questioning. Is that really true? How could we check that? What you have told us, how could we check that? How could we find out if that is true? So the statement has to be clear when it is. A statement can be clear but not accurate, as in most dogs are over 300 pounds in weight. Okay? So in other words, an accuracy is an intellectual standard. If an intellectual can waste even time trying to ensure accuracy, asking and researching in order to know and be accurate. Otherwise, intellectuality can be very costly because you need to say something accurate. You need to have clarity, yes, and also feel ready to repeat it if you think it's not clear to the people you are communicating to. An intellectual is not an ordinary person. Is a giraffe in a community. An intellectual in the intellectual standard has to have a third point, precision. In other words, could you give more details? Be precise. Could you be more specific? Precision. Let me tell you, a statement can be both clear and accurate, but not precise. As in John is overweight. We don't know how overweight is Jacob. Overweight is 100 kilograms. You see, a statement can be both clear and accurate. So you have to have precision, precise. Be precise. An intellectual has to be very precise. Precise is if including being very, very specific. Not saying, watu, those people. Who? You know, you cannot brush everything or paint everybody with one brush. A whole clan with one brush. A whole ethnic group. A whole country. That is not an intellectual who generalize it. Just because Proverbs say so. That is what you believe, or a simple gossip has been released. That is not an intellectual. Is not. Is a lazy one. If he's an intellectual, is a lazy intellectual who doesn't want to be precise or to have precision. The other one is relevance. Relevance is there for an intellectual. How is that connected to the question? How does that bear on the issue? Is this matter about me? Is that, don't you take the matter to the owners? Take the battle to the owners, not to me. The issue you are bringing to me is relevant. So an intellectual should insist on relevance. Now, the sixth point is depth. You have to have depth. That is, how does your answer address the complexities in the question? How are you taking into account the problems in the question? Is that dealing with the most significant factors? So depth has to be there. You have to have depth. Okay, it is not just talking from, just from here, the lips here. It has to go deep, and you have to have depth. There is also breadth. An intellectual has to have breadth. The questions that can demonstrate this breadth is: do you need to consider another point of view? Yeah, you look at it from the breadth. Okay. Is there another way to look at this question? What would this look like from a conservative standpoint? What do other people say? Nyerere trying to employ breadth as an intellectual. When Tanzanians said through a referendum, we don't want multi-party democracy in 1995, he said, no. What about those 20% who don't want it? That must be the reason why you should give them multi-party, many parties, many political parties. Don't just be a single party dictatorship. Give it to those 20%. That is a question of breadth. Looking at even the minority, the majority. It's not a question of winner takes it all. Breadth will push you as an intellectual to also consider those whom you have beaten. You are pushed out of the war. What would this look like from the point of view of others? That is important. It's not just you. An intellectual is able to take responsibility and have the breadth and the depth of things, and also have relevance, precision, accuracy, clarity. And as we finish this, we talk about logic and fairness. An intellectual has to be logical, not illogical. An intellectual cannot just talk without logic. Does this really make sense? That is a good intellectual asking that question. Whatever people say, whatever somebody says, it is you to be left as an intellectual asking, does that follow from what you said, or what we handled last year, or historically? How does that follow? But before you implied this, and now you are saying that, how can both be true? That is all about logic. What you say has to be logical. What you absorb from people, you have to push logic. If you can't ask the question openly or in verbally, you can still ask it in a manner that will not create unnecessary commotion. The last one is in the universal intellectual standards is fairness. Do I have a vested interest in this issue? Am I sympathetically representing the viewpoints of others? An intellectual cannot be so parochial in the sense of being unfair to these due to simple prejudices. That can't work. The last one, what are valuable intellectual traits? What are those valuable ones? There's what we call intellectual humility. An intellectual has to have intellectual humility. An intellectual has to have intellectual courage. Courage of purpose. It is not, if it is humility, it's not just scaring people with your certificate or frightening people with the certificate or your achievement in material acquisition or power you have been given or the position you have been promoted to chairman the other day. An intellectual will employ humility, whatever the position. The other one is courage, intellectual courage. An intellectual will have empathy. Empathy is you are listening to us. You can understand our situation. You can take time to hear us. And I know one professor used to listen to his students. When the students are talking to him, he's just nodding his head. I hear you, John. I hear you, James. I hear you, Peter. I can hear you. Okay, thank you. Okay. That empathy, showing that you are having a consciousness of the need to imaginatively put oneself in the place of others in order to genuinely understand them. That is empathizing, which requires the consciousness of our egocentric tendency to identify truth with our immediate perceptions of wrong studying thought or belief has to die for us to have to demonstrate empathy. Okay, and you see, empathy as a trait correlates with the ability to reconstruct accurately the viewpoints and reasoning of others, and to reason from premises, assumptions, and ideas other than our own. This trait also correlates with the willingness to remember occasions when we were wrong in the past, despite an intense conviction that we were right, and with the ability to imagine our being similarly deceived in a case at hand. So if we have empathy, we have the time now to understand them and put ourselves where these people are. As somebody telling you is depressed by the problems at his own home, it looks easy to dismiss him or her and tell him, even at home we have problems. The issue of money, everybody doesn't have money. All of us, we are hit by COVID-19 poverty-related problems. It is easy to say it that way. But when we empathize, we are able to put that person in our situations and even be able to listen to this other person. At the end of it all, you have a solution to that person. The other take you back to valuable intellectual traits. I hope you have not forgotten. We have humility, we have courage, we have empathy, we have also integrity now. The integrity is somebody who can be trusted. When you are placed somewhere, we have no issue. Okay? You are consistent. You have consistent intellectual standards. Okay? That people expect. If you did it the other time, you can do it the same way. You have integrity and intellect. The other is perseverance. The other valuable trait for an intellectual is perseverance. An intellectual is not in a hurry to conquer others. You are not in competition with anybody. If you come to compete with the people, know that you will be depressed much earlier. If you see my good or my poor shirt you want to wear like I'm doing, or my good shoe, or I see your good house or properties, I just want to get it immediately. And that was not in my agenda. You are a candidate of a lot of problems, and that can't be intellectual. If there are challenges, those who give quick answers, they want to look like they are thinking very fast. But these are not intellectuals, because giving yourself time thinking through and weighing it in all manner that we have noted earlier. Could it be this? What if I do this? What if it is the other one? When you have time, you'll be able to solve that problem. That is persevering. You can persevere. You will not have to conclude when you see somebody for the first time, I know him. Unamjuanje, my friend? Who is more complicated than human beings? It is not easy to understand people just because you have met once, because he has talked once. Let him talk 5 times, 10 times, or at least 3 times. The personality will come out with the time, and you make a very good judgment about that person, and it will be fine. Another intellectual trait is faith in reason. So an intellectual knows that reason is a power in human endeavors. If you have no faith in reason, you are in trouble. So confidence that in the long run, one's own higher interest and those of humanity at large will be best served by giving the freest prey to reason, by encouraging people to come to their own conclusions, by developing their own rational faculties. Faith that with proper encouragement and cultivation, people can learn to think for themselves, to form rational viewpoints, draw reasonable conclusions, think coherently and logically, persuade each other, by reason and become reasonable persons, despite the deep-seated obstacles in the native character of the human mind and in society as we know it. So faith in reason, the last intellectual trait and valuable, we call it valuable intellectual traits, is fair-mindedness. Having a consciousness of the need to treat all viewpoints alike without reference to one's own feelings or vested interests or the feelings or vested interests of one's friends, community, or nation. It implies adherence to intellectual standards without reference to one's own advantage or the advantage of one's group. So fair-mindedness means you are not biased, you are able to be a good judge, you make proper judgment, you listen to both sides before you conclude. When even you put a case like the one which was there, changing the constitution, there are those who just concluded after hearing the first group. There are those who didn't listen to the first group, they listened to the second group, okay? The litigants and defendants and all that. But you see, the danger is, if you listen to one side, you are likely to be biased. And that does not make an intellectual, because there are those valuable intellectual traits. I repeat, fair-mindedness. They have to have faith in reason. They have to have intellectual perseverance. They have to have intellectual integrity. They have to have intellectual empathy. The intellectual has to have intellectual courage. Yes, even to dare write. You can't be have intellectual courage until you are creative, critical and creative and innovative. You have to be brave always. So at the end of it all, we have gone back to our unit, critical and creative thinking. You can't be an intellectual overall unless you are critical and creative. That combines to make you courageous, because if you don't dare, creativity is to dare, be creative and try something else. Try another way. And it is starting from the Socratic questioning, where you ask questions to help you understand things better. That is also intellectual humility. It's also there. In all this, there's humility. Of course, earlier, we talked about universal intellectual standards. They are there: clarity, accuracy, precision, relevance, depth, breadth, logic, and fairness. If we are not any of these, my friends, we are wrong. We have lost the game. So that is something that we need to understand. Any comment?